The wind moved slow over the plains that morning, brushing the golden tops of dry grasses like a tired hand smoothing a child's hair. Dust clung to everything in Dry Creek, from the cracked window panes of its shuttered storefronts to the hearts of its people worn down, sun-hardened and tight-lipped. Clara Madsen stood behind the counter of her trading post, a small structure of warped pine boards and rusting hinges that squatted against the scorched land like a stubborn old dog. She wiped her hands on her apron, her fingers stained with flour and the day's silence. Outside, the sun was already climbing with cruel ambition, baking the dirt street into cracked clay. Billy, the boy she had taken in after the accident last spring, was chasing a one-eared dog with a stick. He laughed as he ran sharp, joyful, and jarringly alive in a place where sound usually came in whispers. Clara watched him through the dusty glass and felt something she couldn't quite name, a pang that was part memory, part fear, and entirely her own. She wasn't much older than 30, though the dry wind and grief had added years that never showed on paper. Her husband, Henry, had died 2 winters ago in a hunting accident that left more blood than explanation. Folks said it was the will of God, but Clara had seen enough to know God didn't watch the mountains. Or if he did, he turned away when men fell. Now it was just her, Billy, and the cows, the 6 jerseys, and a stubborn old bull named Horace. The land was dry, the milk thin, and the neighbors scarcer than rain. But she stayed, because staying was all she had left. The bell above the trading post door jingled soft, polite, but unnecessary in a town this small. "Morning, Clara," said Deputy Cole Brody, removing his hat and brushing imaginary dust from its brim. She didn't look up. "You're not here for sugar, are you?" he chuckled, stepping closer. "No, ma'am, just checking in. Town council's been talking, some concern about your place being too much for one woman, especially one with a child." Clara met his gaze then, her eyes the color of river stones, cool, unyielding. "Billy ain't mine by blood," she said, "but he eats like he is. And the cows don't mind I'm a woman, as long as they get fed. They don't complain." Brody shifted on his feet. He wasn't a cruel man, just a cautious one. He'd been Henry's friend once. That fact hung in the air between them like a ghost they didn't dare acknowledge. "We just worry. Some folks think maybe it'd be easier if you sold the place, moved into town. I could help arrange things." Clara folded a piece of burlap over a stack of canned peaches. "I'm not selling, and I'm not moving." There was silence then, thick as beeswax. Brody touched the brim of his hat again, murmured something about checking the northern pasture, and left with the creak of old hinges behind him. The rest of the day passed in stillness, the kind that clung to your bones. Clara churned butter, mended a saddle strap, and listened to the wind scrape across the tin roof. Billy fell asleep in the shade, a book open on his chest, his mouth slightly open like he was still whispering stories to the wind. But that stillness broke the next morning, just as the sun lit the church spire in copper flame. Clara was hitching the mule when she noticed it, a cluster of townsfolk gathered in front of the livery, shoulders hunched, hats pulled low, eyes darting. There was a tightness to the air that didn't belong to weather. She walked over slowly, curiosity outweighing caution. And there, beneath the rising sun, and a banner reading "A Civil Service to Peace," stood Reverend Elijah Boone, thin, pale, lips pressed into a solemn smile. He held a leather-bound Bible in one hand, and with the other, he gestured toward a rough wooden platform. Upon that platform stood 2 soldiers, flanking a man tall, bound at the wrists, his head covered by a burlap sack. His shirt was torn, his boots mismatched, and his stance was perfectly still, not slumped in defeat, not tense with anger, just still, like a mountain waiting for thunder. Boone's voice rang out, sanctified and strong. This man was found trespassing on sacred land, property of the church and the territory. But rather than rot in chains, he has been offered redemption through labor. For 1 year, he shall serve under supervision on approved homesteads. This is not punishment. This is God's work. The crowd murmured, half intrigued, half unsettled. Clara's eyes never left the man on the platform. Something about the way he stood, even with his face hidden, made her chest tighten. Boone continued, he is Apache, strong, healthy, silent. A blank page upon which salvation may be written. The church begins the offering at $10. There were no immediate takers. The townsfolk shuffled, exchanged glances. A man in overalls muttered something crude. A woman crossed herself. Clara stared harder, her breath shallow. Then, as if the wind carried her name, the man turned just slightly, enough for Clara to see it through the coarse weave of the sack. A flicker of eyes. Not frightened, not broken, burning. It was not fear she saw. It was fury, caged and waiting. And something inside her shifted. She didn't move. Not yet. But she knew then that the silence she had wrapped herself in like wool against winter was no longer enough. Because that man, faceless and bound, standing so impossibly tall amid their stares, had more dignity in that moment than any man with a badge or Bible. The sun had crept higher, casting long shadows across the makeshift platform as the crowd thickened. Dry Creek hadn't seen this many gathered souls since the winter flood of '83, when the bridge washed out and folks came together, not out of curiosity, but necessity. But today, they came not to build, not to mend, but to watch. Clara stood among them, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. The man, the Apache, stood perfectly still, his wrists bound with coarse rope, his feet shackled, the rough burlap sack clinging to the angles of his face. The fabric moved slightly with his breathing, but he did not stir otherwise. He was a statue made of defiance and keen rage. The platform creaked under the shifting weight of the soldiers behind him. And then, with the easy authority of a man long accustomed to attention, Reverend Boone stepped forward. He raised a hand, and the murmurs quieted. This, Boone began, his voice smooth as riverbed stone, is not a spectacle. This is a service. Clara felt her stomach turn. Boone continued. This man was apprehended trespassing on church-claimed territory. Our good soldiers acted with restraint, capturing him without bloodshed. Now, rather than burden the courts or waste precious taxpayer dollars, we offer an alternative, a chance at labor, a chance at redemption. A hush fell over the crowd. Boone held his Bible high. Scripture teaches us that even the wayward must be shepherded back to the fold. And what better way than honest toil under Christian eyes? Clara heard a few scattered amens. The rest was silence laced with unease. She glanced at Deputy Brody standing near the platform's edge, hat low, eyes scanning the faces around him. When their gazes met, he took a step toward her. You could use the help, he said softly, barely above the hush. Clara frowned. Help? He nodded toward the Apache. Strong, quiet. Better than that mule of yours. You'd be doing him a kindness. Better your place than some mine in the mountains. She stiffened. He's not an animal to be placed. Cole. Brody didn't flinch. I'm not saying he is. Just, the Reverend's made up his mind. This is happening. Might as well be you. She turned her face away, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Her hands felt suddenly too empty. Boone lifted a hand again. This man, unnamed, unclaimed, will be made available to a responsible citizen for supervised labor. 1 year. the Lord's number of completion. He let the words linger like scripture, then added, "We begin the offering at $10. No one might." The silence was thick, and not one soul dared be the first to place a bid. Then a voice from the back Willard craned. The blacksmith barked. "What good's buying something you can't even see? Could be blind. Or worse. Take the sack off." Boone frowned. That would defeat the purpose of neutral presentation. Laughter from the crowd. It was a nervous sound, brittle. Another voice shouted, "Hell, I'll give 5. He ain't worth 10. 3, 2. Each bid dropped like a stone, meant not to win, but to mock. Clara stood, frozen, pulse drumming in her ears. She looked again at the man, the only one not shifting or jeering. His silence was louder than all the voices around him. And then, in a moment, she could never quite explain a flicker of movement beneath the burlap. He turned slightly, ever so slightly, and his eyes found hers. It should have been impossible, but she felt it saw it 2 pinpoints of fire behind that mask, cutting through the dust and distance. They did not plead. They did not fear. They dared her, and something ancient stirred in her chest. A memory of Henry, standing beside her on the porch, saying, "Sometimes silence is just a man drawing breath before he speaks something that matters." Clara stepped forward before she knew she had. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the murmurs like a blade. $1. The entire crowd turned, heads swiveled. The laughter stopped like a spooked horse. Reverend Boone blinked slowly. "I beg your pardon." Clara lifted her chin. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held her ground. $1. A wave of disbelief rippled outward. Lila Boone, standing stiff in her father's shadow, gasped audibly. A rancher laughed, short and sharp. "Lord Almighty," someone muttered. The widow's lost her mind. Boone's face froze into a polite mask. "Mrs. Madsen, I hope you understand the nature of this arrangement." "I do," she said quietly. "You'd be responsible for his conduct, for feeding, housing, ensuring he's contained." "I understand." More silence. Brody took a hesitant step forward. "Clara, maybe you ought to—" "I said what I said," she snapped, the crack in her voice unmistakable. Boone narrowed his eyes. "Very well." He turned, gestured to the soldiers. "The woman has spoken," he said, voice bitter beneath the velvet. "Sold for $1. Gasps, murmurs. The sack-covered man didn't move. One soldier pulled the chain leash from a nail on the platform and handed it down to Clara. The rope was rough and coarse. It scratched her palm as she took it, heavier than she imagined, like holding a part of someone's life. The crowd parted in stunned silence as she led him away. His shackled steps slow behind her, dragging chains whispering across the packed dirt like an accusation. Clara's mouth was dry as bone. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the weight of judgment pressing against her spine like cold iron. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. Behind her, Boone watched with narrowed eyes, the corner of his mouth twitching, not in approval, not in anger, but in calculation. As if this bid, this insult to his arrangement, had opened a game he hadn't expected to play. And now, he'd learned the rules. So would she. The ride back to the homestead was long, and the silence longer. Clara sat rigid on the wagon bench, reins loose in her hands, the mule plodding steadily along the dirt road west of town. Behind her, the man her purchase, her burden, her impossible companion sat motionless in the back. The burlap sack still cloaked his head, and the iron shackles on his ankles clinked softly with each jostle of the cart. He hadn't spoken a word, not a grunt, Not a sound of discomfort, just silence, a silence so complete. It seemed to draw in the very breath of the desert. The wind picked up as they left the last row of cottonwoods behind, and Dry Creek faded from view like a bat's dream swallowed by heat shimmer. The land out here was lonelier, harsher. Rocks broke through the earth like bones. Sagebrush whispered secrets to no one. The sky, cloudless and indifferent, stretched wide and far as any truth she'd ever run from. Clara didn't know what she had done, only that she had done it. She thought of Reverend Boone's eyes narrowing, of Brody's hesitant voice, of the chain heavy in her palm, of the man behind her, whose name she did not know, whose eyes had looked through her like wind through lace. What was she thinking? This was not just a laborer, not just a man. This was a storm she had invited into her life. When they reached the farm, the sun was dipping low, staining the land in burnt orange. The house stood in its usual silence, the porch sagging slightly, the windows glowing with the last light of day. Billy came running from the side of the barn, a chicken feather stuck in his hair. "Clara," he called, then stopped dead in his tracks as he saw the man in the wagon bed. The boy's eyes widened, curious, but not afraid. He tilted his head, studying the shape beneath the sack, then looked to Clara with a question hovering behind his freckles. "He'll be staying for a while," she said quietly. Billy nodded solemnly, then did the most unexpected thing. He stepped forward and smiled. "Hi," he said simply. No response came, but Clara felt the shift, the smallest incline of the man's head beneath the burlap. Not acknowledgement, perhaps, but recognition. She led him toward the barn, the rope still in her hand, though she did not tug. He followed her without resistance, footsteps slow, deliberate, chains whispering through the dust. The loft above the hay bales was clean enough. She pointed. "You can sleep there," she said. Her voice was steady, but her heart was a fist in her throat. Still no word. He moved to the ladder and climbed, each step slow with the weight of the iron around his ankles. Clara returned to the house and bolted the door for the first time since Henry died. She didn't sleep. The storm arrived the next evening. It began as a low growl in the western sky, dark clouds rolling over the horizon like a beast roused from slumber. The wind came first hot, dry, then sharp and biting. The kind of wind that peeled paint and lifted secrets. Clara was in the pasture, trying to herd the cows into the lean-to, when the first clap of thunder cracked the silence open. The animals spooked, hooves kicking dust and fear into the air. She shouted, arms flailing, useless against their panic. Then she heard him. No words, just movement. He appeared at the edge of the barn like a shadow pulled loose from the night, chains still clinking faintly with each stride. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He moved with precision, calm in the chaos, cutting through the stampede like water around stone. One by one, he turned the cows, guiding them with hands firm and sure. Clara stumbled, caught off balance, and just as a support beam from the lean-to came crashing down, he reached her. One arm shot out, wrapped around her waist, and pulled her clear. The beam hit the ground where she'd stood with a thud that shook her teeth. They tumbled together into the dirt. She lay frozen for a moment, chest heaving, the smell of dust and cedar in her nose. His body was warm against hers, solid like the earth itself. Then he rolled away, stood without a word, and turned back to the frightened animals. By the time the wind died down and the sky turned to bruise and ink, the cows were safe, the barn door shut, and the lean-to lost but forgotten. Clara stood in the mud, watching him move with the kind of grace that no one ever taught but life itself. He was no savage, no beast, no laborer in need of taming. He was a man, and she had never felt smaller. Later, under the flicker of lantern light, she stood at the barn door with a tin dipper of water in her hand. He sat in the straw, legs folded, motionless. The chains at his feet gleamed faintly. She approached him slowly, offering the dipper. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, with hands still bound, he reached and drank. Clara knelt, her heart rattling in its cage. "I'm going to take that off your head now," she said, barely above a whisper. "You deserve to breathe free air." She waited for a sign: resistance, refusal, anything. But he sat still, as if waiting for her to pass some test. With trembling fingers, she reached up and untied the knot. The burlap was stiff, smelling of sweat, dirt, and heat. As she peeled it away, the world seemed to slow. And then she saw him. His face was carved and weathered, skin the color of sun-warmed copper, cheekbones sharp as ridgelines. His mouth was a line of resolve. But it was his eyes that broke her, dark as wet earth, and just as deep. They met hers without fear. In those eyes, she saw everything: pain, fury, silence so thick it could drown a woman, but also dignity, fire, a soul unbeaten. He looked at her, not as a savior, not as a captor, but as a question. And Clara, who had thought herself empty, felt something shift inside her. The quiet that had once been her armor now cracked, and through it poured something terrifying and beautiful: recognition. She stood slowly, the empty burlap sack in her hands, and stepped back. He did not speak. Neither did she. There were no words strong enough for what had just passed between them. Not yet. The dawn came in, quaint, hesitant strokes of pale pink and silver, caressing the dusty dust of Clara's homestead. Clara and Tanaye worked side by side in the yard, Clara mending broken fence boards, her hands rough from hammer and saw, and Tanaye stacking logs, the muscles in his arms moving with a silent insistence. Neither spoke. Their communication carried through the rhythm of labor, dust wings swirling at their feet, birds calling across the plains, and the creak of wood settling into place. Their unspoken bond deepened in these small gestures. Clara offered water in a tin cup and watched as he drank carefully. He folded his hands and nodded something between gratitude and acknowledgement. In return, he made sure the boards lay straight, the nails secure, his efforts meticulous, as if honoring her trust. It was a dance neither had learned, yet they moved in step. Billy watched from a distance, perched on a hay bale, watching them as though witnessing a miracle. At 10 years old, his innocence was sharp. He absorbed this new closeness between the two adults with curiosity, not judgment. He would sometimes glance at Clara and Tanaye and grin, making them both break their silence in soft laughter that carried away on the breeze. Inside the house later that afternoon, Clara sat at the kitchen table with a battered primer under her lamp. Tanaye knelt beside her, his finger tracing words she had written: SAIL, HOME, FOREST, every letter a gentle bridge between worlds. She watched how his lips formed the sounds, foreign and hesitant at first, but growing confident. He paused, looked up at her with eyes shining not just at mastering language, but at understanding. Clara felt a tremor in her chest and looked away, pretending to inspect the uneven table. "That's good," she murmured. He nodded, a slight bow. Then he turned the page, and she reached across the table, pressing another flashlight of trust into his palm. In the evenings, the roles reversed. Clara would sit with Billy under the wide Utah sky beyond the stable. She handed Tanaye a worn notebook and pencil. "Show him how to track rabbits," she said. voice soft as wind through reeds. Tanaye crouched beside Billy, drawing shallow lines in the dirt-rounded footprints, then deeper impressions to show how to follow the subtle signs. Billy's small hands traced the lines eagerly, his eyes bright. Clara watched this quietly, the way Tanaye spoke gently to the boy, the way Billy looked at him with new reverence. The tableau glowed against the bruised sky, charged by shared purpose and emerging warmth. But even the kindest heart in Dry Creek feels eyes upon them. Lila Boone was watching. She watched Clara and Tanaye walk to the barn in the deepening dusk, the kind of confident intimacy that struck Lila like a blade. She watched them laugh, a low, hidden smile passing between them, over something Tanaye had drawn in the dirt. That image landed in Lila's mind, and it spread like wildfire. She couldn't stand it. Not the closeness, not the kindness, not the way Tanaye rested his hand on Clara's back, guiding her through a doorway. She saw the spark, and in that spark, she saw herself eclipsed. So Lila went to her father's vestry and whispered rumors like curses. She's married to him. They sleep in the same bed. She's fancied him since the day she bought him. Reverend Boone heard, lips twisting into a shadowed smile. Rumor was fuel, and he knew how to turn fuel into fire. At Sunday service, the church was crowded, faces unreadable behind stiff hats and anxious whispers. Clara didn't attend, but word got back to her. Boone stepped from the pulpit and clutched his Bible, voice sonorous. "We have witnessed a moral decay," he proclaimed. "A woman of our own, a widow entrusted with a farm, has welcomed into her home a savage stranger. And while he speaks no words of worship, he thrives in her solitude. This is not companionship, it is transgression." He paused, gaze sweeping the congregation. "This is not the way of the Lord. It is the way of sin, and we must stand against it." His words fell into the hushed sanctuary like stones sinking in a well. Some nodded, others looked down, ashamed not of the sin, but for feeling it sprout within them. The preacher's voice echoed, "A widow may grieve, but when she grieves in a saddle beside a heathen, she offers her own soul for ransom." The sermon ended with a hymn that rang hollow in Clara's ears. She stood by the trading post, watching people file out, their eyes glancing at her like barbed wire, sharp, dangerous, wounding. She remembered the day she had lifted that sack from Tanaye's head, the slow reveal of his face, his eyes deep and unbending. That look wasn't weakness, it was innovation. But here it was, twisted into sin. That evening, under a sky bruised by smoke and memory, Clara found herself beside Tanaye in the barn's loft. The window was open to the breeze, the smell of hay and dust heavy around them. He sat on a bale, head bowed, reading aloud, stumbling over to be or not to be. His voice was quiet, but the flame in his eyes flared. Clara slid the primer from his hands and sat next to him. "You're Brutus," he said. "Then you are Cassius." They sat together in silence, letting the words bind them. Clara finally spoke. "They call you savage." He turned to her, head level, but his eyes haunted. "They call me nothing." She studied his face, the way his brow furrowed with pain, the way his jaw set. "I call you brave." He looked at her, and in that moment, the space between them softened. Fire burned, not of destruction, but of forging. They were melting prejudice, doubt, history into something new. But embers could burn houses too, and that fire was dangerous. When Clara returned inside that night, she found Brody at her kitchen table. His eyes were sleepless, anxious. "They're saying the preacher's sermon. People are uneasy." Clara nodded, swirling coffee in her cup, watching the dark surface. I've seen worse storms. Then I pray this one doesn't take you, he said. She closed her eyes, found strength in his prayer. But her voice was fierce when she spoke. I'm not afraid of sin, of rumor, or of a jail cell. I have something worth standing for. And so the fire between them glowed brighter. The kindling was lit by shared purpose and mutual respect. But the flames burned the old structures of Dry Creek, and soon they would either light a path forward or consume everything in their path. The morning sun lay flat and heavy across the farm, gilding every blade of grass and splintered fence post with a golden sting. Clara was milking the jerseys when Deputy Brody rode up, dust spiraling behind his horse like stubborn ghosts. Clara stiffened, her heart sinking into familiar dread. Brody dismounted without greeting. Clara, he said, voice low, eyes locked on the row of water cans. We need to talk. She kept her back to him, gently pressing milk into the pail. The cows mooed, patient and unhurried. She raised the pail and answered, I'm busy. He shifted, took a step closer. Orders came through last night. Tanaye has to be returned to the authorities. Official paperwork, territory commands. She froze, pail halfway to the ground, milk sloshing like a wounded memory. Returned, Brody swallowed. He's considered escaped from custody. The Reverend. He made some calls. Clara put the pail down and turned slowly. Her blue dress, the one she'd worn when she tore that sack away, looked foolish in a moment like this. Cold anger bloomed inside her. She said through clenched teeth, You're going to arrest him. He looked away. I'm just following orders. Clara snatched his gaze. Orders from Boone. From the church, what about the law? Cole. He met her eyes, regretted it, and looked away again. Late afternoon. Brody returned. The cattle were in the barnways. Billy helped feed them. The man they called Tanaye was leaning against the loft ladder, tossing straw in the air, laughing with Billy over a joke the boy had told. Clara's blood turned ice. She watched Brody walk toward them, horse clopping soft on packed dirt. He drew rein, dropped from the saddle, and watched Tanaye's laughter with a tightness Clara felt in her throat. Billy didn't see the change at first, but Clara did. Tanaye's face shifted to alertness when he saw Brody. The laughter stopped. There was caution in the stillness. Brody folded his arms. His uniform glinted in the dying sun. Tanaye, he said quietly. The echo of officialdom in his tone stung Clara worse than bullets. Tanaye nodded. Befulant. Still. Clara stepped forward. You don't have to. Brody cut her off. It's done. He pulled out rough hemp rope from his belt. You have to come. Clara's voice broke. Cole, please. He glanced back at her, pain blooming in his eyes. I'm sorry. That one word was worse than any blow. She felt it across her body, deep, hollow. Tanaye stood, shackled wrists held by Brody. He didn't resist, calm, but betrayed. Clara's mind world cracked. She watched as Brody led him away. Billy's scream came later, Mama, but it was enough to shatter the silence they'd built. Clara dropped to her knees in the dirt, hands splayed, world tearing around her. That one word was worse than any blow. She felt it across her body, deep, hollow. Tanaye stood, shackled wrists held by Brody. He didn't resist, calm, but betrayed. Clara's mind world cracked. She watched as Brody led him away. Billy's scream came later, Mama, but it was enough to shatter the silence they'd built. Clara dropped to her knees in the dirt, hands splayed, world tearing around her. Brody brought Tanaye to the small jail in town, a wooden structure with barred windows and a single lock that rattled in the wind. He secured the shackles to the wall. Tanaye sat back on his heels, watchful, unreadable. Clara came later, escorted by 2 neighbors at Brody's request. Reverend Boone was there, tall and pale, arms crossed, lips set like stone. "There will be no disturbance," Boone intoned. Voice flat, "The law has been served." Clara approached, heart pounding with rage and betrayal. "He's not a criminal." Boone's smile was slow. "He escaped custody. He's a fugitive, harbored by you. That is a crime." Clara's scream was a bare animal sound. She threw herself at Brody, hands grasping his coat. "You were his friend." Brody held her, eyes haunted. "I am sorry." Reverend Boone stepped forward. "Clara Matson will be held accountable. The farm and the store were complicit. They provided shelter, sustenance, and science." Clara's eyes flew to the traveler's hymn book, lying on a wooden bench. Boone's trophy, his gospel. She spat at its worn pages. "He's not your property, Silence," Boone commanded. "Plot and power belong to the territory now." That night, the wind roared like a beast outside. Clara sat in the jail corridor, chains heavy in her lap, her face ashen, tears drying before they fell. Billy cowered behind the railing, petrified. Clara held his hand, voice steady though hate boiled inside her. "He'll come back," she whispered. "He has to." But as dawn trembled into the sky, the jail lay empty. The door had been undone, the lock loosened. The guard lay unconscious in a pool of vomit and sweat. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, just silence, eerie and complete. Boone arrived soon after, scowling. News spread fast: Indian gone. Clara's friend escaped again. He shook his head slowly, as though savoring the judgment. "That farm must be seized," he declared, voice triumphant. "She harbored a criminal. Under my guidance, it will serve as territory property by law." Brody came quietly, sweat beading on his brow. He avoided Clara's eyes. She looked at him like a snake might, beautiful once, but sunk its fangs deep. The betrayal pressed into Clara's bones like winter cold. She stood in the yard before dawn, watching the moon dim into the day. She touched the fence rails Tanaye had rebuilt, memories flickering his hands, his laughter, his calm defiance. She tasted the heat of his eyes, fiercer than any storm she'd known, and she vowed she would not let him be silenced again. She would not let her farm be stolen. She would not let the town's fear trample everything they'd built between them. Her fists clenched, her heart hammered. She felt broken, but not resigning. The battle line was drawn. The quiet desert had erupted into conflict. And Clara, once a woman who hid behind silence, would now fly to with a roar. The desert morning was still when Clara led Billy along the bare trail, the leather notebook tucked tightly beneath her arm. The sun had just shown its face, painting the sands rose and gold. Clara's pulse beat like a war drum against her ribs, but she pressed forward, led by the hope that Tanaye had placed hope here too. Billy stumbled over a stone and looked up at her, chin quivering. Clara kneeled, her heart catching. "You all right, kiddo?" He nodded, eyes eager. "You think he left something else?" Clara swallowed hard. "I have to believe he did." And she did, because he had. In that notebook, left her crumbs on a trail that led far from their farm. They reached a rocky canyon by midday. Clara squinted at the cliff walls. Scarred by time and heat, she guided Billy by memory, matching the glyphs in the notebook: an Apache sun, a spiral carved by some hand on a chilled night. Billy found it first, pointing. Clara exhaled like a prayer of relief. When they entered the cave, the shadows embraced them. Clara lit a lantern, the flame flickering against petroglyphs: horses, coyotes, spirals winding toward a flat stone altar. Beneath it, lay a rolled parchment, tied in leather. She knelt, heart pounding, and lifted it carefully. The parchment spread out across a rock top, and Clara's breath hitched. A map, centuries old, etched in ochre and charcoal the valley where her farm lived. The church perched on a ridge marked by a crimson skull glyph. Her hand trembled as she traced the outline. This was their land. Our land, she whispered. Billy caught her wrist gently. Mama Clara swallowed back tears. We have our reason. As they sank by the altar, Clara sensed movement above, a distinct echo of footsteps too purposeful to be hers. She stiffened. The map clutched like a lifeline. Clara's voice rang out into the cave's hollow silence, sharp as flint. Who's there? A pause. Then came the slow, deliberate sound of boots on stone. Out of the shadows stepped Reverend Boone, draped in his black coat like a judge come to sentence. The lantern light caught the hard edges of his older now, but still carved with the confidence of a man used to commanding rooms. She froze. You, she said. What are you doing here? He looked at her, first the woman, then the child at her side, then the map on the altar stone. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. I came, he said slowly, to pray. Clara narrowed her eyes. Don't lie to me. You've been following us. He said nothing, only looked at her with that preacher's gaze, part pity, part judgment, and wholly evasive. Her jaw clenched. She lifted the map like a torch. You knew about this place. You knew what it was before you ever built your church on it. Boone's face tightened, but he held his ground. It was land no one was using. There were no deeds, no signs. The Lord provided. Clara stepped forward, her voice rising like a storm wind. Don't you dare dress it in scripture. You murdered his brother to claim this ground. You shed blood, and now you build pews over bones. His mouth opened, then shut. The lantern flickered. For a moment, Clara saw the man, not the preacher, not the authority, but the trembling flesh beneath the robe. You don't understand, he said finally. The boy attacked. It was self-defense. Was it she challenged? Or did he just stand in the way of what you wanted? Boone's hands trembled around the leather-bound Bible he clutched. It was a time of chaos, he said, voice cracking. The army looked the other way. I was doing what men like me had to do to bring order. No, Clara said, her voice cold now, deadly still. You did what cowards do. You killed, and then you built a pulpit over the grave. He faltered, finally cornered. You think I'm proud of it, he barked. You think I sleep easy at night. I don't care how you sleep, she said, but I won't let you pretend anymore. Boone looked at her, and in that moment, his mask slipped not out of repentance, but from exposure. There was no confession in his eyes, only fear of what she now knew, the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. You don't know what you're meddling with. Clara, he said darkly, that land, that fall, they carry more than bones. They carry rage. Clara met his stare, steel meeting stone. Then let it rise. The night came, cool and vast over the canyon walls. Clara held Billy close and thought of home she once built. It felt heavy, empty. She stroked her son's hair, mind swirling. She had loved Tanaye more than she thought herself capable, but she had loved a land stolen by sin. Now, she understood that everything, the farm, the store, the future she crafted had roots soaked in blood. She rose and walked toward the ridge's edge, the moon rising behind her. She laid the map on the stone altar. Then she bent, touching the symbol where Boone had buried the body of a man, even stronger than herself. A man named, I didn't know his name yet, but a brother. And she whispered into the desert night, "I will fix this." Through the crackle of distant coyotes, she heard it, a soft footstep, the presence of someone uninvited. Vital. She turned. Tanaye stood there, eyes black with both exhaustion and fire. His body was lean, face tired, but unbowed. He stepped into the lantern glow, eyes fixed on Clara. She released the map with a breath she'd forgotten how to take. "Tanaye," she whispered. He moved closer, exhaustion tuning his posture into resolve. He looked at the map, its edges stained with desert dust. "We reclaim this," he said simply, his voice a quiet current of certainty. Clara's eyes met his, fierce and raw. Together, Boone sank to his knees in shame. Clara turned away, didn't let him see the mixture of triumph and sorrow in her gazes. Under the moonlit sky, Clara and Tanaye knelt together at the altar. Billy sat between them, awed by the golden sands around them. They held hands over the ancient rock. Tanaye rested his other hand on the map, tracing the red skull glyph silently. Clara felt his warmth and relief in her bones. When dawn bled color across the canyon, they rose, two souls bound to reclaim not only land, but truth, legacy, and justice. Clara tucked the map and notebook into her satchel. Billy followed, bright-eyed, behind them. Boone watched from the ridge, a shattered man touched by his own making. The desert twilight held its breath, and Clara, once a woman bound by silence, now walked forward into story, ready to write the next chapter for them all. The morning sky over Dry Creek was pale and unforgiving as Clara rode into town. Billy, clutching her hand, in her satchel was the ancient map, notebook, and questions heavy as lead. She dismounted at the edge of the dusty main street, pausing to set her gaze on the modest church steeple, its cross as false now as a false prophet's promise. Her heart pounded, but she spurred the mare forward. Inside the church, a Sunday crowd still gathered, some in surprise, others in Kate's dread. Clara stepped into the wooden sanctuary, the barn's door creaking like a slow requiem. Reverend Boone rose from the pulpit and flinched, but forced a polite smile. "Clara," he said, voice smooth as polished wood, "you're early." She didn't smile. "I have come to show the truth." From beneath her coat, she produced the old parchment. She laid it carefully on the pulpit, the map's edges curling like weathered skin. "This map," she said, voice echoing low over the hush, "proves your church stands on stolen ground. On my farm, where that pulpit now sits, lie the bones of the Apache of Tanaye's brother, killed by you." Estes fluttered across the pews. Clara held up the leather notebook. He left his words, his symbols, his story, because he believed someone would listen. She nodded toward Billy at her side. "He found safety on that farm," she said, pointing at her son. "He risked his life to save mine when the storms came. Tell them, Billy." The boy swallowed and stepped forward. His small voice settled over the crowd. "He carried me out of the storm when the barn fell in. He saved me," Mama said. Silence roared in the pause that followed. Clara's gaze wandered over faces, some disbelieving, others trembling with uncertainty. Reverend Boone stood, furious now, his hands twisting the pulpit rails. "You lie," he accused. "Off with her tongue, and burn her place of infamy." A flicker of fear seared across the congregation. Some held their hands to their mouths, others shifted in their pews. Clara's throat tightened, but she forced her spine upright. At that moment, the doors burst open. Wind and horses, and Tanaye entering, with a group of Apache refugees, tanned and strong, faces etched by both courage and sorrow. They filled the church entrance with their sullen defiance. One by one, They laid down their tribal scarves at Clara's feet and stood vigil by Billy and his mother. Their eyes met Clara's and offered steadfast solidarity. The townspeople lurched, some heartened, some horrified. "Know these faces," Clara said, voice firm. "They are people farmers, families, survivors. They have lived on this land since before me, before this church." A murmur woven with guilt and fear rattled through the congregation. Boone turned white with rage. "This is an outrage," he shouted, advancing. "They're savages. They'll take your homes, corrupt your children." "You," Clara snapped, stepping forward so close their breaths mingled, "are the one who killed and lied. You built on bones and named it holy." The gun in Boone's belt gleamed. Hands trembled among the watchers. Clara felt Dr. Cole Brody's presence in the back of the church. His face was tight, racked with what he'd done and had tried to undo. Boone drew his weapon, aimed at Clara, mouth dry. Clara looked at the faces around her. Some turned away. Some held their breath. "Brother Brody," she said softly, stepping back, not away, but gathering courage. "Will you stand by this?" Brody took a slow step forward. His hand hovered over his holster. He looked from Clara, fearful, determined, to Boone, furious, unhinged by needs of power over conscience. "You used his faith to kill his blood," Clara said, "and you'd use a bullet now to silence what you fear." Cole's face crumbled. He sighed heavily and shook his head. The tension coiled tighter. In a heartbeat, Cole drew and fired. The shot rang loud, an echo that shattered a lifetime of lies. Reverend Boone crumpled, his Bible falling with him, pages fluttering like broken wings. Clara felt the sound reverberate in her chest. She stepped forward, knelt by Boone's side. But he lay still, eyes open, empty. A silence that felt like a wound followed. Then came sobs, soft, uncertain. Clara rose and faced the congregation. In her heart was triumph, tempered by sorrow. Justice had come, but at a cost. The Apache stepped forward, picked up their scarves, and quietly filed out with Tanaye and Billy trailing behind them. Clara touched her son's shoulder, then followed, bowing her head once before the fallen man who'd once claimed sanctity and death. On the porch, she found Brody waiting. He avoided her gaze until finally he met her eyes, red-rimmed, but clear. "I'm sorry," he said. I lost the soul of my oath." Clara nodded, tears falling for the man and the land rocked by their truths. "I know," she said quietly. "Now, let's rebuild together." He held out his armies. She took it, and together they walked into the sunlight, leaving behind the echoes of gunfire and lies. The last stand had been made on broken ground, by brave hearts bound to truth, and it marked the dawn of a new story for Dry Creek. The autumn sun draped itself over Dry Creek in soft layers of wood, as though the land itself had paused to bask in a long overdue moment of serenity. Clara rode into town that morning, Billy seated ahead of her on the mare's back. Their arrival drew nods and quiet greetings, an unspoken acknowledgement that the events at the church had changed everything. Where once the townsfolk had turned away or whispered behind cotton curtains, now they held their heads high as she passed. She dismounted at the general store, Billy hopping off with a bright smile. The butcher, old Mr. Hastings, tipped his hat respectfully and offered a rare, full smile. "Morning, Clara." "Morning, Billy." No sneer, no dismissive glance, just warm eyes and genuine respect. Clara's throat tightened, and she tipped her hat back to him. "Good morning." The bakery smelled of fresh bread, and Mrs. Delgado offered them a loaf on the house, her cheeks rosy with kindness. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. Clara felt the weight of past isolation fall away, replaced by something new and fragile: acceptance. That afternoon, At the courthouse steps, Tanaye stood tall beneath a bright sky. Reverend Cole Boone's body lay in a modest coffin behind the stage, his fall final, but far from forgotten. Clara stood beside Billy and Deputy Brody, who wore a simple coat, pale and gaunt. The judge stepped forward and cleared his throat. By order of the territory, Tanaye is hereby pardoned. This man's actions saved a child's life. This man stands innocent of wrongdoing. Let history record that justice was found here today. Applause rippled through the crowd. Some cheers guarded, others heartfelt. Clara's gaze drifted to Brody, who stood just behind them. He stared at his boots, as though unwilling to meet her eyes. Then came the moment that pressed on Clara's heart. Billy, in his small voice, spoke into the quiet. "I want to say something." He climbed the steps and stood before the adults, shifting his weight. "Tanaye," he said, eyes gleaming, "you saved me during the storm. You carried me through the barn when it collapsed. I'm glad you're my father." He choked over the last word. But that small acknowledgement rang louder than any decree. Clara closed her eyes, feeling tears warm her face. Brody stood a step behind, bowing his head as the words washed over him, cleansing and sorrowful. That evening, Brody's departure was marked not by ceremony, but quiet resolve. He gathered his few belongings, his badge, a well-worn coat, a folded sheet of stationery, and rode out at dawn. In the final hush before he left Clara a letter on her porch. "Clara, I cannot undo what was done. I cannot claim innocence. I have failed in duty and in courage. I carry your forgiveness, like a hope I may never reach. I offer this, not as penance, but as prayer. May you and Billy be safe and happy. Cole Brody." Inside was a small leather pouch. Clara opened it to find 2 heavy silver coins, her husband's initials worn faintly on them, a repayment for the day he sold Tanaye's chains. It wasn't a gift, it was a reckoning. Meanwhile, word traveled that Lila Boone was leaving Dry Creek. She packed a single trunk and left a letter at the church for Clara. "Clara, I can't stay here. I lost Brody. I lost my way. I couldn't bear your courage, your grace. I'm sorry I tried to destroy what you built. I was jealous, because I never had what you had. I pushed and whispered and lied. I'm ashamed. I'm going to Montana, to live with my cousin and try to learn how to be someone better. I hope you can forgive me someday." Clara read the letter and folded it carefully. There were no tears, only recognition that forgiveness, once granted to her, was now something she could give to another. Days melted into weeks, the seasons shifted, and still the creek bed, Dry Creek, lay silent. But then the rains came slow at first, a few drops that fell tentatively like hope, then torrents that ran for days until water carved troughs once dusty and barren. One late afternoon in October, Clara led Tanaye and Billy to the water's edge. The creek gurgled and curved, silver in the fading sunlight. It had not carried water in over a decade, and now it did, solid proof of rebirth. Clara knelt beside the shallow flow and lifted a handful of cool water. Tanaye came to sit beside her, arms steady around her waist. They both looked out at the dancing light off ripples. Billy tossed smooth stones into the stream, one by one, and laughed as they skipped twice before sinking. The sound was pure, and Clara felt it echo deep in her chest, closer to joy than she'd felt in years. They sat in a peaceful silence. Clara leaned her head on Tanaye's shoulder. He rested his hand over hers, and she felt the steady heat of his heart. Billy's laughter subsided into soft babble as dusk edged the skeet in lavender and gold. She didn't need to say it aloud. The creek spoke it for them. Dry Creek no longer whispered silence, it sang. They walked back to the ranch together, steps unhurried and hearts full. The land around them exhaled, alive once more, fields green, fences standing firm, the promise of a shared future. The past could not be undone, but it had been acknowledged, honored, and transformed. From bones and betrayal came acceptance. From desert and drought came song of water. Clara squeezed Tanaye's hand. He squeezed back. Billy danced ahead in the last light of autumn, kicking up dust and laughter alike. The three of them, widow, father, and son, were whole in a way Clara had once believed impossible. And as water traced its endless path through their land, so did hope, flowing ever onward, singing the story of their hearts. The end.